Wait, this is a gaming keyboard? But wait, so is this, and this. Oh, the sweet sounds. Don't even get me started on this. Oh, but you like the clicky sound?
Yeah, that's right, baby. We made Thocky clicks.
Don't worry, I'll explain that soon. Because howdy hey, I'm Hipyo Tech and I'm a gamer. And I have one question for you. Why would you want your gaming keyboard to suck? Like, wouldn't you want it to feel good and sound good? And I've tried lots of gaming keyboards, from ASUS to Corsair to WOOTING even. But what if you already have a gamer keyboard and you want thocky, clicky switches? Or maybe you just want to know what's out there. Maybe you like the gamer aesthetic. So in this video, ASUS sponsored me to look at all of their different switches and all of their different keyboards. But they didn't expect what I was gonna do next. Later in this video, I'll create a thocky, clicky switch. But I'll also show you how you can mod any of your gaming keyboards, so this is ultimately just a very helpful guide. Now first, I'll start by showing you the keyboards, and let me tell you that even though this video is sponsored, ASUS did not review this video, and the only thing they told me to say was that I needed to show you these switches. Well, I don't know if they wanted me to tell you that they told me that, but oh well. Now, I've looked at all but one of these keyboards in the past, so if you want more info on them, then I've got full videos on my channel. But the unboxing experience is really similar for all of them. You get a soft plastic bag, some accessories, but for the ROG Azoth, you get an accessory package. This comes with a lot of stuff that's really great if you want to get into customizing keyboards and you don't want to spend $70 on a lube bundle. And if you're new to custom keyboards and have no idea what I'm talking about, then stick around. It'll make a little bit more sense later, I promise. In the keyboard hobby, we like to take keyboards apart. We like to modify their switches to make them sound and feel better. And ASUS is one of the few keyboard brands that's actually been trying to merge the two worlds. Now, the first board I'm showing you is the Strix Scope II 96 wireless gaming keyboard, blah, 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 blah. And I will say, all of these keyboards have a gamer price tag, which means you'll be paying more for them for little more than just the gamer name. This is my critique of ASUS every time I make a video on them, and they still decide to sponsor me, so I guess that's cool. However, at $180, just because it's expensive doesn't mean that it's inherently bad, and the Strix Scope II does have some redeeming qualities, like a compact numpad layout and a beautiful, beautiful roller knob. Oh my god, it's been years! Unironically, British viewers, this is the type of knob that I want to touch every day. Anyways, the one thing that ASUS is known for, that I will give them massive props for, is their wireless capabilities. Over 2.4 gigahertz compared to some other custom keyboards, it is just blazingly fast and responsive, and it is probably the only wireless keyboard that I would trust enough for a lot of gaming. Now, I'll be talking about how to mod your keyboard and the different switch options soon, but next I want to talk about the ROG Azoth, because this keyboard's evolved a little bit over the last year or two. It's still one of my main recommendations for if you really want wireless in your gaming custom keyboard hybrid monstrosity, and it ranges from 190 to 250 depending on what switch config you want, which is actually really important because they differ a lot. Now, one of the shining perks of this board is the OLED screen in the top right, because you can use it as a little multimedia dial, you can change the brightness of your board. It's just really handy and also looks pretty nice overall. Like, in comparison to the Scope II, the Azoth just offers a lot more. Even though I love the beautiful rolly knob, it's hard to beat how customizable the Azoth actually is in comparison. Now, I also got my grubby little hands on their newest low-profile keyboard, and if you want a full video on this, let me know, but I'll be taking a bit more of a look at it later in the video. Now, if you're seriously considering any of these keyboards, then you're probably wondering about the build quality. Considering you're going to be paying almost $200 for a keyboard, it's best to know what you're getting into. And the Scope II is unapologetically mostly plastic. It feels relatively cheap, like a keyboard that's about $100. And yeah. The Azoth feels a little bit more premium because its top case is made out of aluminum, but it still shares a bottom case made out of plastic. ASUS has said that this is how they get such fast wireless performance, but I am just a little bit skeptical that they couldn't do a little bit more. The Azoth is also made with gaskets, which you can't really recognize, but you also won't recognize it after I mod it later in this video. And the Scope II has no gasket performance. If you're wondering what gaskets are, they make your board flex a little bit when you type on it. So that's the main meat and potatoes, but there's a couple other things that I think are worth comparing. One thing that I do really love is that ASUS uses their own type of stabilizer, which actually is really smooth and doesn't have a lot of rattling. One thing I don't love is that they still absolutely cling on to shine-through gamer keycaps. But now it's time to talk about the switches, the most important part of this video. Now, I wouldn't be an honest content creator if I didn't first talk about rapid trigger switches before talking about the ASUS switches. Now, Hall effect switches like in the WOOTING have rapid trigger, which in very specific games at very high skill levels can give you a decent amount of advantage. They are on paper the best gaming switch. However, in reality, they don't feel that great, and they also don't sound that great. But sound and feel mean nothing when it comes to gaming, right? Well, yeah, and that's where it ultimately comes down to preference. Personally, I've used hundreds of keyboards, and I actually don't like the feel of rapid trigger, and even when I beta test these rapid trigger keyboards, I end up turning it off. It's only useful in some games in some specific contexts, and honestly, I feel like you're kind of coping if you feel like a rapid trigger board, or any keyboard, rather, any keyboard, will just magically make you good at gaming. But you should know that that option is out there, and ASUS currently doesn't have any rapid trigger keyboards. But if they do, then I will definitely let you know. Now for the ASUS switch line, I'll start from worst and go to the best. The worst being their NX Red switches, which are just kind of like a year or two behind. From what I can tell, they're phasing these switches out, but they're still selling boards with them, so I just have to say, I don't recommend them. Here's the Azoth with and without them. Then we have their NX Browns, which it's funny that they call them ultra tactile. I'm gonna have to put that to the test. Now in the keyboard hobby, we joke about Cherry MX Browns not feeling tactile at all, and these actually do have a pleasant tactile bump right at the top. And they actually aren't a very light switch for a gaming keyboard. Like most Red switches are typically between 30 and 45 grams. These switches do come factory lubed, but from what I can tell, the Reds and the Browns come from a different factory from the Snows and the Storms that I'll be looking at soon. To me, this factory just feels like lower quality, so I think the Reds and the Browns are just inferior compared to their other switches, but we'll be looking at those in just a second. You see how the brown switches just kind of made the Azoth sound a little bit cheaper? Well, it also felt a little bit cheaper. But it's time to look at the Snow switches. Now, these switches are actually incredible. I've brought them to keyboard meetups, and people have been amazed by them and thought they were enthusiast-grade switches, and they're offered in both the Strix Scope II and the ROG Azoth, albeit at a more expensive price. Come on, guys, what? Force-wise, they sit somewhere in between the red and the brown switches, and they're a buttery smooth linear switch with really good factory lubing and a box stem to prevent dust. Now, if you're just getting into keyboards, you probably see the word THOCK thrown around quite a lot. And these THOCK, there's no other way around it. They are a deep sounding switch that is just really pleasant. Don't worry, we'll be looking at the CLICKY switches very soon. Part of that THOCK is that they've been lubed very aggressively from the factory, which gives them a hyper smooth feel without feeling too over lubed. But I can hear you wondering, Hipyo, how do I make my keyboard sound as good as yours? Well, that's actually really easy, and let me take apart the Strix Scope and show you. The secret is press and seal. Now, there's a ton of different ways to mod your keyboard, and some are a little bit more risky than others. Press and seal being one of the most risky, so maybe don't try this at home. I'll be showing you a safer way in just a second. But the press and seal mod, I take out all of the switches and keycaps, and then I coat the whole PCB in a layer of press and seal. Then the keyboard actually already came with dampening foam that I just reapply, and this kind of gives the whole entire board a much poppier sound, which I'll show you in just a second. Next, and this is just preference, I replaced the included keycaps with a really cheap set from Amazon. Similar to the guy she tells you not to worry about, these keycaps are taller and thicker. This helps contribute to your keyboard having a deeper sound, and the feel is actually maybe potentially worse, but taller keycaps are kind of a love it or hate it type of thing. But it's hard to deny that the keyboard looks absolutely gorgeous now. Maybe it's just my own personal cynicism, but I think gamer keyboards are a little bit overblown. Like, I love RGB, don't get me wrong, but I'm just really sick of the basic gray on gray or gray and black, and honestly, I love a good pop of color. But just listen to this. Now, if press and seal scares you, which honestly it should, let me show you what I did to the Azoth, which is actually even more simple. Now, because the Snow switches are so good, I really don't have to do anything to them. I can leave them as is. But I will be replacing the keycaps on this board. Some of you might have seen my previous video, but I made a plant-themed keycap set with ASUS and Goblin Tech keys, because what's the one thing gamers can't touch other than women? It's grass. Now, the Azoth is a little bit more complicated on the inside, so be careful when you take it apart, but I just coated the back of the PCB in a layer of blue tape, which is the tape mod. Also, I spray painted it and did a really bad job. Please do not comment, hey Hipyo, your spray paint job sucks.
I said don't comment that. It hurts my feelings. I have feelings.
But honestly, I love all these little customization techniques and bloop blops that you can do to your keyboard. Just listen to this before and after. Literally, all I did was add tape to the back of the PCB and change the keycaps, and it's so much deeper. Speaking of deeper, I'm going to show you 30 seconds of the ROG Falchion RX low profile keyboard, and you're going to tell me if you want a full video on it. Now, I've actually recently fallen quite in love with low profile keyboards because of Lo-Fi and Newfie. And at 160 bucks, this keyboard's actually priced pretty similar to both of those, albeit with a bit of a gamer twist. Now, this is mostly about the switches, and this board has optical switches, which are different than the mechanical switches and the other keyboards. I won't get too into that. And they are buttery smooth and sound decently clacky. My biggest gripe with this board is that the keycaps just feel really cheap, and again, we've got the plastic bottom. They just can't escape the RGB. Bing bong, bing bong. It's pretty nice. It looks good. And it's also got dampening foam and a touch panel and a bunch of stuff that I'm not going to get into. But how does it sound? Remember how I teased you with deep sounding clicky switches? Thocky, clicky switches even? Well, that's the ASUS NX Storm switches. Now, I personally hate clicky switches, but I think it's totally okay to like them. However, these aren't your average Cherry MX Blue, and they're actually built quite a lot better, even factory lubed. They've got a really nice tactile bump and an audible click that isn't too annoying. And honestly, I'm happy seeing more clicky switches being made for the people that like them. But now, class, what have we learned? We can modify our keyboard to make it sound and feel better. Now, these NX Storm switches are available in the Azoth and the Scope II. And if you're not worried about keeping housemates up at night, then they are a pretty decent option. Ignoring all the factors that I previously said in this video, like the fact that ASUS keyboards are just a little bit too expensive compared to their competition. Sorry, ASUS. You guys can work on it. I believe in you. Now, my goal for these things is to make them sound a little bit deeper, so I'm gonna use this Super Lube oil, which is actually a thicker one than I normally use. And I'm gonna put one little drip on each side of each switch and then let it seep in. Now, if you have a lot of time, then you can take each one of these switches apart and hand lube them. And there's lots of great lubing tutorials out there on YouTube. But I found for switches that are already factory lubed that this is basically good enough. So after that was done, I wanted to just throw on some nice keycaps. And I got these Ember keycaps from Novel Keys. These are Dysa PBT, and like what we did in the past, these are just gonna make the board sound a little bit deeper. They also have the added benefit of making it look pretty nice. Now, if you got to this point, please leave a comment of your thoughts on all of these keyboard switches and different keyboards. And I want you to go away from this with just one thing: preference. All of these keyboards and switch options are just that. Options. If you're on a budget, they're probably not for you. If you're an ultimate custom keyboard gamer, they're probably not for you. Then who do I think they're for? That person that's just getting into keyboards but still wants to feel comfortable with one of the legacy gaming brands. The Snow switches are actually a fantastic enthusiast option, and the Storm switches are just really cool and clicky. But I'd love to know, do you hear a difference between the before and after of this final sound test?